All right, in the last video, we talked about making preparations to lower the suspension and alter the ride height of my 128. What I'm going to do today is more of kind of like a temporary change to make sure I get everything where I want it and see if there's any other like unintended consequences of lowering the car that much. You know, does it create any bind with the sway bar? Do I create any problems in the back with the brake lines, anything like that? So I'm going to lower it significantly, again, kind of using temporary measures, if you will. The other part of that is because to lower it correctly, the parts most likely that I'm going to need are going to have to come from overseas, if not even made before they come from overseas. So it's going to take some time. So I'm going to do kind of like, again, a temporary approach in the shop today. Lowering the front on a car like this, very straightforward, very typical. So the front suspension on these is in fact just a, typical McPherson strut design, right? So there's the coil spring, and it's sitting on the strut, which is bolted to the knuckle, right? So you could buy just lowering springs, which are springs that are just shorter and designed to compensate for the ride height, and trim or adjust the bump stops. The other thing that's popular with these is to find the rear strut assemblies from an X19 and put them on the front of this, and that gets you some lowering. And then the other thing is there are coilover assemblies available for this car, if not made for this car. So they may be made to order, but you could just do a typical coilover setup, which then gives you adjustment in ride height. So the front is fairly conventional to lower. The rear on this is a little different and frankly pretty simple. So the rear suspension on a Fiat 128 is really comprised of these lower control arms. So you can see a lower control arm, there's the other one, and a transverse mounted leaf spring. Okay, so the spring goes across and basically provides load under the control arms. And that load is basically captured, if you will, by these perches right here. So again, the spring comes down, rests on this perch, which is bolted to the control arm with these two bolts. This bolt does not go through. It's not like a regular bolt. It's actually welded to the control arm. So as you spin this off, this bolt stays here. For lowering the rear, there's a couple things. The spring. So some people just take this to a spring shop and get some of the arch removed out of it. Some people go to the 3-blade or 3-leaf stack that you'll find on a station wagon variant of the 131, or not 131, 128 rather, and then have that de-arched. But the really simple quick fix is, since the spring rests on this perch, is to add a spacer between the perch and the control arm. And that could be done just by going to the hardware store, buying the sleeves like spacers, and then taking a grinder and removing this bolt and buying a longer bolt. Or I came across these guys. So these are actually made to extend the studs on an ATV and therefore increasing the track width on an ATV. But what's cool about these, if you buy the right ones, which I will include the link to down below, it ends up, it's the same pitch as the bolt that's already part of the control arm. So I don't have to grind this bolt out or anything like that. I could actually just remove these nuts, remove the perch, thread this up, and then put the perch on at the bottom of it. And it should provide 2.5 inches of drop. These come in different sizes. I bought the kit that widens the track of an ATV by 5 inches, which means 2.5 inches on each side, which means this is a 2.5 inch spacer. So I'm going to install this here now and see what happens. So these are 18 millimeter, I believe. So if I break this one free. Okay, it's one, and they're actually 17 millimeter. With the bolts off, now I got to try to get the perch really doesn't want to move. So I came in and tried to just separate it a little, persuade it a little with a flat screwdriver. So there's a lock washer, like a split washer, and then the big washer. I was kind of gummed up on there. So it looks like the washers that were on this one are rusted on pretty good. They're coming. There we go. It's all coming off now. But yeah, they did not want to come off. So now with the studs just exposed, I could come in with the spacer, and it should, because I bought the ones that were basically made for the same pitch, should be able to thread them right on up. And they have the hex on them, so once I get them up there, I can tighten them. Okay, it's tight. So I snugged up the spacers. They're nice and tight. And now I could just replace the perch. So we're gonna go washer. Just like I'm gonna use the original hardware for now. Lock washer. That started on washer, lock washer, done. So that's it. Just torque those up. The perch is there. There's space between the spring and the perch right now, but when the car gets lowered, the spring will rest on the perch, and that'll lower the whole ride height of the back of this car. So this side, same thing. I already have the nuts off. The washers are still fused on there. The only difference about this side is there's this little bracket that goes to the lever that I think is used to kind of like bias or proportion the brakes based on the load in the suspension. So we're going to take this little like pin or clip out to detach this. So then this bracket could come off when we take off the perch, and we can reinstall it, and we'll re-clip the pin in later. So there's the pin. Off that comes. We're just going to pry. I may need to replace this because of this like bushing is so brittle. It's probably not the best thing in the world. There. Came off. There's the little bracket. There she goes. Okay. So spacers for the side. Carefully thread them on. Get them started. So, starting the hardware to reassemble the perch, and I did the first one first because these are a little bit. They're not kind of pry. So I have the perch back on, started the hardware on that side. The big question on this side is, where does this little bracket that catches the proportioning valve arm go? Do I mount it here, right where it was? Or do I mount it back to where on the perch? And I think the perch is the correct location, because if it was here with the car lowered, this would already have like that 2.5 inches of extra pressure on it. So I think I have to put it more in like the neutral, if you will, position, which would be down here. So the bracket's on this side. I can't really connect the brake line proportioner. It's so far away. So what I think I have to do is lower the car to get this to go back up and then clip this guy on. I'm also looking at the bump stops up here and pretty sure I have to trim these because I don't have, there's like 2.5 inches just there in travel. So next step is to put the car down and see what's going on with the geometry. Looking at the clearance between the bump stop and the control arm, looking at this proportioning bracket to see how close it is to this, and looking at the brake lines, making sure they don't have any issues, they're not getting pinched by anything. And that's really it for the rear, except for the little fine tuning. So I just lowered the 128 and boom, perfect. So this is using 2.5 inch spacers that were meant to be ATV stud extenders. They are the perfect thread and pitch. So it mounted using all the stock mounting hardware. I do have to trim the bump stop or replace it with a shorter one. But otherwise, this is exactly what I wanted. Very inexpensive. And it put the car right down where I wanted it to be. Now, my next thing is going to be addressing the front, which with the back in the proper kind of ride height makes the front even look even more ridiculous. So check this out. If you forgot, that's on the ground right there. That's not up on the lift. So it's just insane. And I'll deal with that in the next video. But for now, the rear, lowering the rear of your 128 using spacers, inexpensive spacers, and I have a link to the specs and the kit in the description below. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and stay tuned for part 2 where I get the front of this thing out of the air.